You bear heavy responsibilities these days, and an article I read some time ago reminded me of how particularly heavily the burdens of present-day events bear upon your profession. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone broke, and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Engels ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeois cheating. But when all his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath to the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, revolution, and the Cold War. If only this capitalistic New York newspaper had treated him more kindly, if only Marx had remained a foreign correspondent, history might have been different. And I hope all publishers will bear this lesson in mind the next time they receive a poverty-stricken appeal from a small increase in the expense account from an obscure newspaper man. I have selected as the title of my remarks tonight, "The President and the Press." Some may suggest that this would be more naturally worded, "The President versus the Press," but those are not my sentiments tonight. It is true, however, that when a well-known diplomat from another country demanded recently that our State Department repudiate certain newspaper attacks on his colleagues, it was unnecessary for us to reply that this administration was not responsible for the press, for the press had already made it clear that it was not responsible for this administration. Nevertheless, my purpose here tonight is not to deliver the usual assault on the so-called one-party press. On the contrary, in recent months, I have rarely heard any complaints about political bias in the press, except from a few Republicans. Nor is it my purpose tonight to discuss or defend the televising of presidential press conferences. I think it is highly beneficial to have some 20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor, finally, are these remarks intended to examine the proper degree of privacy which the press should allow to any president and his family. If, in the last few months, your White House reporters and photographers have been attending church services with regularity, that has surely done them no harm. On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever be a Secret Service man.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Happy Friday. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for being with us today. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we are building a liberty machine, and it's Johnny Cash Friday, so it's always fun. One of the best. I mean, not only is Johnny Cash an Arkansas legend, he's an Arkansas tradition, really. You got to enjoy that. For our online audience is getting to listen to this President Kennedy speech during the breaks from April 27th of 1961. I found the presidential speeches fascinating, by the way. To go back and listen to what were the issues of the day. Really, with Kennedy, to go back and listen to the fact that if he were alive today, there'd be no way he could get the nomination of the Democrat Party, right? Johnny Cash Friday's the day where we try to listen to as much Johnny Cash music as we can, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day. We got a great show for you. Coming up at 7, we'll be talking with Mr. Josh Waters. Going to give us a little analysis and breakdown of the tax task force on taxes and what they're recommending when it comes to tax reform, so that's good. Then at the bottom of the next hour, we'll be talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan, I'm sure, about a bunch of things. There's a new video that's been posted on Twitter from Jerry Cox, the president of Family Council, urging people to vote against Issue 1, the bad tort reform law. We'll play that video for you in the hour. I'm also going to play a video from this Facebook page I found. Many people, it's been making the rounds, but it's called The Swamp. It's a series that focuses on, different aspects of what goes on in Washington, D.C., how the party politics games are played. There's one in particular with a congressman from Kentucky. His name is Thomas Massey, and he talks about how if you want to be on this committee or that committee, that you have to rent your space. You have to be able to raise X amount of dollars in order to maintain your committee status with the party. It's a fascinating look at what goes on behind the scenes. At one point, Thomas Massey said this would be illegal anyplace else but Washington, but the Constitution says the House and Senate can set their own rules. So we're going to play that for you as well because it's extremely eye-opening, if you will, on this Johnny Cash Friday. All right, so what do we got here? Let's start things off with the this was the first thing I read this morning when I got up, the nuclear option. It's over at Breitbart.com. Hot, swampy heat. The week Washington officially lost its collective mind. It's by Charles Hurt. Not going to read the whole thing, but he says the entire media, political, government power complex camped along the Potomac River in this fetid August heat officially lost its collective mind this week. In an orgy of political drama playing out in courtrooms up and down the Acela corridor, President Trump's lawyer and his one-time campaign manager stand convicted of various crimes. In this fever, worse than Joe McCarthy's Red Scare, President Trump therefore has been officially declared guilty by association. But listen to this. This is the part that I wanted to get to. Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager for 6 minutes during the summer of 2016, was found guilty of a host of crimes dating back more than a decade relating to his various business ventures, none of which has anything to do with President Trump. What is interesting about the case against Mr. Manafort is that prosecutors declined to pursue some of the charges way back when. But that was before Mr. Manafort betrayed the political establishment by working for Mr. Trump's presidential campaign. And we should add that what he should add, Mr. Trump's successful presidential campaign. Once he committed that cardinal sin, all bets were off. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, they started the Russian collusion narrative. We had people in the Obama administration unmasking individuals that they were spying on. They're trying to cover that up. They don't want the people to know what actually happened. They certainly don't want an impartial Justice Department to look into their dealings. And so they've got to get, honestly, these people in the deep state, probably some that we don't even know about yet, whose names aren't even in the headlines, they have to remove President Donald Trump from power. This is their goal, and they see the midterms as the way to do this. They see that they want to take the House. If they don't take the House, they're going to be very desperate. But this is their last thing. They've got to slow the Trump agenda. They've got to stop the Trump agenda. They've got to find a way to impeach the president. And I hear the mainstream media this morning, and it's one thing after another. Not only do you have the social media situation where they're censoring conservatives, or really they're just censoring opinions that they don't believe should be out there. You now have the money changers. You have Visa. You have MasterCard. They're now beginning to shut down transactions, saying they're not going to serve certain people. They're not going to allow them access to their money. They're not going to allow them to collect money from others using Visa, MasterCard, or these other services because of who they are. The Southern Poverty Law Center has their ear, apparently. It's very strange times when you see just how, I was thinking on the way in today, as I was listening to the mainstream media, and I thought to myself, we really do live in the age of propaganda, because I have a long enough memory that I can remember how the mainstream media covered, for example, the signing of Obamacare. The mainstream media told you that Obamacare was good because it's what they believed in, because they believe in socialized health care, because they believe in more government control, because they believe in health care rationing, really, is what we're talking about. That's the only way you ever control costs, is to control access to care. That's where they want to go with all this. That was the plan all along. But the bottom line is the media would have had you believe that President Barack Obama signed us into a utopia. If you go back and look at the coverage, they weren't presenting the facts and letting the people make up their own minds about what was going on. All of the anchors and all of the corporate heads clearly were envious of socialized Europe, and they thought this was. And so how did they present it? Oh, in a positive light. They would never say anything negative about it. I mean, it's crazy when you really think about over time how they present things. And there are more people now, and this is true, since President Donald Trump has been elected, there are more Americans aware of the bias in the press than ever before. That is the good news. The fact that he won means there are more Americans aware that the press is biased than ever before. The fact that they're continuing to attack him, despite his successes. Yeah, of course, we don't live in a perfect world, but there are more Americans becoming aware of this every single day. And that is driving them nuts. That's driving the deep state nuts. It's driving this, we have to get him out of office at all costs motivation. And I just have to say, as bad as the press is, I'm beginning to think their reactions to a successful Donald Trump presidency and a popular one, according to one poll, his popularity or job approval has doubled in a year among black Americans, from 16 to 30%. That's a huge jump. Folks, if that trend continues, the mainstream media knows they're no longer going to be able to manipulate one group of people just because of the color of their skin and say you have to vote with only one party. If people are starting to think for themselves and embrace this constitutional republic that we have, this representative republic, that's going to that's going to be really bad for these mainstream media types. That's an understatement, but so that's where we are. I think the more the mainstream media lies, I want you to imagine that every time they lie and they tell big lies. I was talking to a guy at the station yesterday who said one of the stations, there's another station, there's several other stations in the building where I broadcast from. I was talking to one of the guys who was doing the shift there, and they were running an ABC News thing at the top of the hour, and he was saying it was so wrong, and they ignored so much about Molly Tibbetts, and they refused to say that she was murdered by an illegal alien. He said, I stopped the newscast and I cut in, maybe he came back right as the newscast, and then basically corrected everything that ABC News had left out. I mean, there are people who are getting it. There are people who understand how bad it is. And so the next time you hear it, I want you to imagine that the more sensational and the more they mislead you, the more inside they are shaking to pieces thinking, oh my goodness, what is going on? They put out a facade of confidence. We're the arbiters of fact. We're objective. We are the ones who are giving the people the truth. But I'm telling you, when you get to a point where you could just take the Molly Tibbetts thing, for example, or you can take the let's actually take the Paul Manafort thing. It's obvious that the prosecutor in New York, in the Southern District of New York, was waiting on the Paul Manafort verdict. When it rains, it pours. Now, you could say they were hoping they were going to get a conviction out of Paul Manafort on all 18 counts. When it rains and pours. But because the jury was deliberating for as long as they were, let's assume that the prosecutor from the Southern District of New York thought that the Manafort thing, or somebody told him, you know what, Manafort may not be found guilty. He may be found innocent. So we need to have this Michael Cohen plea ready to go to combat what may happen, because we need the Mueller investigation to still appear legitimate. We need this narrative to still continue. We can't have it die. We can't let the American people know we've been lying to them for 18 months or for, 2 years. We can't have them know this. If you don't think that the Cohen plea was released to the media and made official right as they were waiting on the Manafort verdict, the Manafort verdict comes in and look, no Russia collusion. Yeah, they get him on crimes from decades ago, but no Russia collusion, and boom, Michael Cohen to sway the outcome of an election. And then everybody had all these lawyers and people on TV saying this is damning to Trump. And then, of course, 24 hours later, you realize that, no, it's really not damning to Trump, because just because he agreed he violated campaign finance law doesn't mean he actually violated campaign finance law. He did this because they had other stuff on Cohen, and he didn't want to go to jail for the rest of his life. I'm telling you, if you helped Donald Trump win the presidency in any way, get ready. There's a target on your back. Note to all attorneys, don't take clients that have presidential aspirations who don't like the status quo and think outside the box, because your office will be raided and then you will plead guilty to a crime you didn't actually commit to stay out of jail from other things. And they're going after Roger Stone next. because, they fault him with the Trump presidency. The telephone number is 870-275-9799. Did you hear that the Russian to English translator that was at the Trump Tower meeting personally served Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Barack Obama? The Russian translator who was present at this infamous 2016 meeting where campaign officials testified that he was previously an interpreter for Clinton, Kerry, and Obama. That's interesting, right? Huh. I wonder what this meeting, there are people that are saying, look, when you look into all of this whole thing, just like there's a perjury trap now, there were other traps in the future. Of course, when you look at Hillary Clinton's relationship with the Russians, she's clearly projecting and deflecting here. No, it's Donald that is colluding with the Russians. Yeah? Anybody ever look into a story called Uranium One? We're going to take a break on this Johnny Cash Friday, and we're going to be back here in just a moment. We got a lot. Speaking of the news media being the arbiter of fact, Conduit News, we launched a new website Monday. Well, KARK has already mentioned Conduit News, but it'll be interesting. It's interesting to read how they described Conduit News, and I'll tell you more about that during this broadcast as well. Don't go anywhere, folks. Thanks for starting the beginning of your weekend with us here at the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Back in a moment.
My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security, a challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are conceived.
Okay, so up at conduitnews.com, Joe, can you go to the front page of Conduit News? I've got a new article up there, and it is the breakdown. It's an excellent article breaking down what happened this week in Greenbrier when Mr. Kirby Ward was found not guilty after being charged with the offense of carrying a weapon unlawfully. And it's a really good breakdown of everything that transpired, and it actually ended up spawning this article from KARK because there's a link to a YouTube video. So Conduit News obtained the dash cam footage or the officer body cam footage of the arrest of Kirby Ward, and that prompts KARK to write this story. YouTube video causes confusion over open carry laws. And Stephanie Sharp, now isn't that a strange title? The YouTube video causes confusion. Not the officers in the YouTube video. Not them. Listen to this. A YouTube video is raising questions about the confusion over open carry. A man was pulled over in May. He was never arrested but given a citation. So I'll correct my problem, not his arrest, but his citation. He was charged. He was never arrested but given a citation for having expired tags and carrying a weapon. But just a few days ago was found not guilty for the gun charge. By the way, I think he was also found not guilty on having the expired tags as well, by the way. This was originally posted. Listen to this. This was originally posted by the organization called Conduit News. It's a site that says it's for conservative news and politics. And I'm reading this story to you by the organization called KARK that claimed, and you see, the mainstream media's got to do this because they have to maintain that they are objective, you see. We're objective. We're not picking one side or the other. The fact is, opinion or news where you know where it's coming from is now the new objectivity because it's being honest with you, because the mainstream media is not objective.
not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security. And the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion. For the facts of the matter are that this nation's foes have openly boasted of acquiring through our newspapers information they would otherwise hire agents to acquire through theft, bribery, or espionage, that details of this nation's covert preparations to counter the enemy's covert operations have been available to every newspaper reader, friend and foe alike, that the size, the strength, the location, and the nature of our forces and weapons, and our plans and strategy for their use have all been pinpointed in the press and other news media to a degree sufficient to satisfy any foreign power, and that in at least one case, the publication of details concerning a secret mechanism whereby satellites were followed required its alteration at the expense of considerable time and money. The newspapers which printed these stories were loyal, patriotic, responsible, and well-meaning. Had we been engaged in open warfare, they undoubtedly would not have published such items. But in the absence of open warfare, they recognized only the tests of journalism and not the tests of national security. And my question tonight is whether additional tests should not now be adopted. That question is for you alone to answer. No public official should answer it for you. No governmental plan should impose its restraints against your will. But I would be failing in my duty to the nation in considering all of the responsibilities that we now bear and all of the means at hand to meet those responsibilities if I did not commend this problem to your attention and urge its thoughtful consideration. On many earlier occasions I have said, and your newspapers have constantly said, that these are times that appeal to every citizen's sense of sacrifice and self-discipline. They call out to every citizen to weigh his rights and comforts against his obligations to the common good. I cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation an obligation which I share. And that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. So much. Got a little problem there. All right, so real quick, I gotta say my piece about this. By the way, we got Mr. Josh Waters coming up at 7:05. We'll also have State Representative Dan Sullivan swinging by at 7:33 this morning. Really excited about that. Okay, I got to say my piece about this. So we have this story over at Conduit News. Defendant not guilty on carrying a weapon charge. Judge says Act 746 is confusing. Now, in this article, you also have a link to the video, which is, let's see here. Yeah, the actual body cam footage of the confrontation between Kirby Ward and these officers that work for the Greenbrier Police Department. And so this video, well, do we have a little bit of this video queued up already, Joe? I want just to give you just a little bit of, just play a little bit of this. This is Kirby Ward. You see this on the screen there. Body cam footage, gun confiscated by Greenbrier, Arkansas police. It's the Conduit News YouTube video. Listen to this.
I'm the one that carries the gun.
Yes, sir. I've always been told to do that, to unload it.
Not when I'm walking up to the vehicle.
Well,
that's a concern of mine.
Yes, sir.
You don't have a concealed carry. You should not have it in your waistband in the first place.
Well, we have.
It should be laying separate to begin with.
Well, I'm under the.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought we have a
You see what
constitutional
I'm saying?
carry in Arkansas.
That's fine, but you got to have a concealed carry if you're going to conceal it.
Uneducated.
You've got it concealed where nobody can see it. You
Yes,
have to
sir.
have a concealed carry license.
I didn't.
To
I'm
do
not
that.
aware of that. I've always been
Well,
under the impression
you
that.
have to study the law to understand that.
I mean, I have studied the law pretty. Is that
Well,
not,
if you're,
is that
listen
not
to
right?
me,
Is that not
if
right,
you're
sir?
trying to tell me your rights about carrying a weapon,
I'm not.
you should be able to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm under the
Okay.
impression I have, I've watched a lot of Arkansas stuff. I've read the laws and stuff, and I
You
understand we have
cannot-
a state concealed carry, but
You cannot conceal carry a weapon without a concealed carry license.
really, see,
Period.
I didn't know that.
Period.
I knew that we have in Arkansas
Period.
open carry.
Stop.
law-
Stop for a
You
second.
weren't open carry.
Stop
No,
for a
no.
second. That officer was wrong. He was just found not guilty, officer. Period. He was found not guilty. I mean, my goodness. How does it feel? How does it feel to be wrong? Now, listen, I just want these officers to figure out what the law is and not end up wasting the taxpayers' money because you don't know what the law is. Right? And that's an example. This is an example of this law has been in effect since 2013. Right? How much taxpayer money have we wasted on these 6 trials where the people, either the stuff is thrown out, the charges are thrown out, or you have a not guilty verdict? How much more taxpayer dollars do we have to waste before our leaders and the Arkansas State Police will quit holding on to their money and admit what the law actually says? Carrying a weapon in the state of Arkansas has been decriminalized, and the only way you're guilty of carrying that weapon, concealed, open, permit, no permit, is if they can prove that you have malintent and that you're going to unlawfully use it against another person. Whether it's a gun, knife, club, bat, whatever, that's the status of carrying a weapon in Arkansas. It's called, generally, freedom. Freedom. That's right. So, based on that, and, I'm so glad. I'm sure Kirby Ward, you know what? Kirby Ward has probably had the best week of any Arkansan in this state because he beat the charge. He is not guilty. and he got his weapon back that they took from him, but he had to go through a whole lot of stuff and mess to get to this point. Body cam footage. Anyway, so this video has gotten so popular. Right now, I think it's up at 7,000 views so far. And that provoked this article over at KARK, okay? That provoked this article over at KARK. Go back, okay, so switch back over to this article where it says a YouTube video is raising questions. Now, listen to this. That's not the story. I don't know who Stephanie Sharp is, but she's written this story over at KARK, and the headline is YouTube video causes confusion over open carry law. Well, why is there that's not the story here. The story here is what happened to Kirby Ward and how he just was found not guilty. The story here is what the government did to Kirby Ward, and they did it because they didn't know what the law is, not because a YouTube video is causing confusion. How in the world do you read this? How in the world do you say that the YouTube video is causing confusion? It's the officers who were confused. There was a dispute between Kirby Ward and the officers were wrong. Wouldn't that be a more accurate headline? Headline, officers proven wrong. Officers, cite a man for a crime he did not commit. There's a lot of other headlines besides making YouTube the story. And then you get down here and they cite Conduit News for being the source of the YouTube video. This quote, this was originally posted by the organization called Conduit News. It's a site that says it's for conservative news and politics. Why don't you guys just report on the content of the video instead of where the video came from? We have a mainstream media that would rather question where the news came from. They're more concerned about who's reporting the news than they are about the news itself and figuring out what happened and finding out if it's true or not. Raise questions about the motives of Conduit. This is the mainstream media here, KARK. They can't help it. They have to do this. They're the arbiters of fact. We may not be, right? Let's raise questions about the motives of Conduit News, not the accuracy of the news or the video. Listen to this. It goes on to say, this was originally posted by Conduit News. It's a site that says it's for conservative news and politics. No. We report the news, okay? We're not for news. We report the news, just like you claim to report the news. What a headline. It says at the end that they tried to get a statement from Leslie Rutledge. The spokesperson there sent an opinion, the 2015 opinion on Act 746. That was not a perfect opinion by any means, but it at least did say open carry is a thing. And it's, it's here. Good grief. And they cite some other lawmakers and everything else. But I look, this was a fascinating piece over here at KARK. Okay, what else do we have? Let's start here. Following up with the news, and you can go the news of Family Council. You can go to Conduit News and check out the video that we've got up there. It just says Paul Harrell defends Family Council. So that's if you probably want to at least go watch that after we play this for you. Family Council Action Committee, the head of that, Jerry Cox. You know what? Jerry Cox is a man of principle. His organizations are based on principles. And you know what? If you disagree with him on an issue, that doesn't mean he's going to back down. And he doesn't expect other people to back down if they have another opinion. I promise you that. Here's Family Council's Jerry Cox posted this video on Twitter. And I'm sure the Arkansas legislature is going to, I don't know, who knows what they'll do. Who knows what they'll do in response to this. I think they've already done enough from what I hear. Listen.
One, because it puts a price tag on human life. It shields big corporations from lawsuits if their reckless actions cause serious injury or even death. So that means that the stay-at-home mom, the child, the handicapped person, the elderly person in a nursing home, if they're injured through some reckless behavior on the part of some powerful interests, it takes away their ability to obtain justice. And so we say that it puts a price tag on innocent human life, because it does. In fact, it's a moral issue, because how we treat our neighbor and how they're treated when they go to court matters. And we need a justice system that's fair to everyone. And issue 1, unfortunately, tips those scales of justice in the direction of the rich and the powerful. My name is Jerry Cox, and I'm Executive Director of Family Council Action Committee. And we're urging you and everyone in Arkansas to join us in voting against issue 1 this November. Don't put a price tag on innocent human life.
All right, there you go. Way to go, Jerry Cox, coming out against issue 1. Of course, he's been against issue 1 since 2017. Some of the Arkansas legislature, I hear, are just finding out about this. They lobbied against issue 1, tried to tell you that this was a bad bill, right? That it wasn't the tort. It was tort reform that goes way too. Well, I mean, come on, letting the legislature set rules of evidence. I read a story from who was it? Maybe it was a Facebook post. I can't remember who it was. They were saying that there's not going to be any bad thing happen if the legislature sets the rules of evidence, that there's not going to be any, I don't know, that they're perfectly capable of doing it, that they're not going to, special interest won't influence them setting rules of evidence. And I just think to myself, are you kidding me? Do you not know the environment that is Little Rock and the Marble Palace? And how in the world can you predict what future legislators will do when you're not there? You may not do it, but there's certainly a lot of other people that would. Good grief. Issue 1 does a lot of things. Not to, caps what attorneys can make in a class action. It caps, your damages. So, that's the setting the value of human life. It was written by the nursing home industry. Lets them set rules of evidence. It's a disaster. It's actually probably, according to the court challenges that are going to go up to the Supreme Court as to whether or not this thing should remain on the ballot for the November election, maybe too many issues rolled into one here. We'll wait and see on that. But, man, it's a great video by the Family Council's Jerry Cox. And here's a guy, I just want to reiterate this from what I said on Monday. Here's a guy who has been a tireless advocate for a Christian worldview in government, traditional American values in government during all the way back in the 90s, but even before that, when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. That's what Jerry Cox has been doing. That's the environment he's in. And back in the day, when the Democrats were controlling things, you couldn't get the Democrats to get on board with any sort of anti-abortion legislation. And yet the Family Council was still trying to work on certain issues. Couldn't get any movement on the pro-life side like we can now, but you could try to fight other things. And this issue right here is actually something that they attempted to fight successfully. Listen, I don't want to just paint everybody who supports issue 1 with a broad brush and say that you're I can't. You know what I'm saying? We could never agree on any issue again, right? I don't want to do that. For those of you out there who are going to support issue 1, I'm not going to support issue 1 for the reasons, well, some of them that you just heard Jerry Cox say. But I will tell you, if you are a supporter of issue 1 and you're against corruption in government, I really think you have to evaluate your support for issue 1. Well, maybe you would dispute this. Issue 1 was written by the nursing home owners. You realize this, right? Issue 1 was written by special interests who want, nursing home owners to be less liable when they do something bad to an old person. I know that's pretty blunt, but that's the way I feel about it. And let's say you maybe say, Paul, I think you're being too harsh on that. Okay, well, convicted Jake Files, Senator Jake Files, who was the head of the Senate Committee on Revenue and Tax, when he filed this, I guess back in 2015, a bill that is very similar to what we're voting on this November. It was a so-called tort reform piece of legislation. A nursing home owner gave him $80,000. We know this because of a discovery process in court documents. Okay? So clearly the nursing homes are willing to pay off Senator Jake Files and reward him for filing a piece of legislation that is very similar to what we're voting on this November. That's number one. Number two, there is a judge. His name is Mike Maggio. He is in jail. He pled guilty to taking a $10,000 bribe to lower a judgment against a nursing home owner. Now, if in fact you're a supporter of issue 1 and you agree, yeah, the nursing homes do have a big part to play in the are you against corruption in government? Are you against the appearance of corruption in government? Surely, if after all of that, if you're still going to be a supporter of issue 1, surely you're not going to claim that voting for issue 1 will end special interest influence, because the very issue on the ballot is there because of special interest. At least admit there's special interests on both sides. Would you do that? Issue 1 goes way, way beyond what conservatives have talked about for a long time in the context of tort reform. It goes way beyond that. And you know it does. Giving the legislature the ability to set rules of evidence is a step too far. Capping what attorneys can make when they, in some of these cases, look, class action lawsuits can be frivolous and they can hurt business. There's no doubt about that. But they also can prevent people from continuing to harm consumers or patients or whatever. I mean, there is a balance there. Capping what some of these attorneys can make when sometimes they spend years without ever getting a dime because they're tied up in litigating the whole thing. Litigation doesn't happen overnight. That's ridiculous. And by the way, why would people who support issue 1 support socialism? I know you're going to really hate me on this, conservatives or Republicans, but you realize by trying to limit what attorneys can make when they're trying to use their services and what they learn, and maybe in some cases trying to pay off their expensive educations, you realize that that's a tenet of socialism. And for some reason with attorneys you want to, and I'm no fan of attorneys because most of you legislators are attorneys and you're screwing things up. But on the principle of letting somebody make in a free market what they can make, I'm for that. I wouldn't want you to socialistically tell me I couldn't sell my radio time for what I want to sell the radio time for. That would be socialism. That would be saying, Barack Obama. What did Barack Obama say, Republicans? He said, I do think there's a point where you make too much money. That's what he said. Remember that? This man, I mean, if Obama could have, he would have capped what everybody could make. Well, you can't make more than this. That's too much money. This is America. Whether you're an attorney or a talk radio host, government shouldn't tell you how much you can make. Let people contract the way they want to contract. How about that? Stay out of contract law.
this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group
firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share. And that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
This administration
look at the time. Wow, that kind of wraps things up for us this hour. Didn't realize that. Joe, our producer, board operator, timing things perfectly. When we come back, we're going to be talking with Mr. Josh Waters about the tax task force options. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, but want to get his opinion on what we're, what is really happening here. Are they actually going to recommend a decrease in revenue? We'll be back in just a moment.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share, and that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security, and we intend to do it. It was early in the 17th century that Francis Bacon remarked on three recent inventions already transforming the world: the compass, gunpowder, and the printing press. Now the links between the nations, first forged by the compass, have made us all citizens of the world, the hopes and threats of one becoming the hopes and threats of us all. In that one world's effort to live together, the evolution of gunpowder to its ultimate limit has warned mankind of the terrible consequences of failure. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being with us on this Johnny Cash Friday. As always, we try to listen to as much Johnny Cash music as we can, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day. Also, by the way, we're broadcasting across multiple platforms, so that's always good. Up at conduitnews.com, as well as we're up at our YouTube page, facebook.com/conduitnews, and everything else. Yeah, here it is. Here's the music, Johnny Cash Friday music. We're going to listen to as much as we can through the rest of the hour, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day and the week. Folks, welcome back to the program. We've got Mr. Josh Waters on the program. It's always great to have Josh on the line. Josh, how you doing this morning?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really good. Now, I want to talk actually about two things. I want to talk about the tax task force's proposal, but were you in the courtroom in Greenbrier a couple of days ago where Kirby Ward was found not guilty of carrying a weapon?
I was, yes. Went over there to Greenbrier on Tuesday and followed up, on that, on the trial, and then there's a new piece out at conduitnews.com. I'd encourage people to go read that kind of gives a breakdown of the trial and the testimony and the closing arguments, and it kind of puts everything into perspective of the body cam video that was released as well. So
yeah, and that
very interesting.
Yeah, body cam video that's up at the Conduit News YouTube page. It certainly is getting a lot of views, and it's even been picked up by by some mainstream outlets, and so that's very, very interesting. And yeah, the article is great. It's comprehensive, and it really does summarize, where we are. And I'm just glad Kirby Ward was, found not guilty. Now, I kind of misspoke last hour and said that I thought he had actually also been found not guilty of his tags being expired. But can you shed some light on that? He actually was found guilty of that, but he had paid to register his car. He just didn't have the sticker on his license plate. Is that right?
Yes, and honestly, that I think a lot of people, including myself, that was kind of an afterthought of the whole trial, in case the real focus was on the carrying a weapons charge, and so but I think that goes to his truthfulness as well. That this is just your average Arkansan going about his day, and really ran into a terrible situation where at the end of the day they confiscated his gun. For almost 3 months now, before he got it back, and so I was pleased with the outcome. I think it would have been great if the judge would have ruled on the unlawful intent portion of the statute, and really, honestly said, hey, Act 746 is clear. There's not any confusion. But he really said the opposite. He said, to say that this is confusing is an understatement of the year, was his exact statement in his ruling. And so I thought it was great. Tim Loggins talked about, they're 6-0 on this charge. And so maybe this will be, since it's getting out there more than some of the other cases, this will be a educational opportunity for officers around the state so that this doesn't happen to people again.
Yeah, I think Act 746 is not confusing. The only way it's confusing if it's some scale where on one side you have a level of confusion and on the other side you have political consequences. Then you could say it's confusing, meaning if I rule this way, oh my goodness, I'm going to be upsetting the status quo. But as far as what the law says, I mean, it's not confusing at all. So, Josh, tell us about the task force on taxes. I mean, they're putting their recommendations forward. They're putting the governor's recommendations forward as well. Are you surprised? I mean, if they do what they say they're going to do right now, the way I understand it, it's going to be less money going to the government.
Yes, that was the kind of, the ending portion of yesterday was talking about the revenue impact overall of all the proposals, the tax increases that they have proposed, which is about $51 million in tax increases. Now, a little caveat there, they do not have a revenue impact for the fuel indexing tax. And so it's 51 without that. I'd be interested to know what it is with that. But their revenue impact for increases is $51 million. And then they have several different options of income tax proposals. So when they look at those, it ranges really anywhere from, I think, $180 million to about $370 million total tax cuts. And so when you look at the net, the option A, option B, there's multiple options, but the net was around, I believe, 180 to 200 million net tax increase. 200 million less money.
You said increase. You mean decrease?
Decrease. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry. Decrease.
Okay. So there are some revenue generators in this. I mean, the total is a decrease, but so you mentioned something called the fuel index tax. So in this plan, are they going to instead of just going from like a model where it's X amount of cents per gallon, they want to treat it more like a sales tax where it's a percentage? Is that what they're proposing?
Well, it's basically they want to adjust for inflation automatically, and they want to build in kind of a percentage increase each year to where as inflation rises and the cost of construction and everything rises, they want to keep up with that rather than a static, okay, here's the tax rate, and then we'll find out how much revenue comes in. So it kind of ensures they have an ongoing increase to meet what they say is a shortfall due to the cost of construction going up, whereas the revenue is somewhat static on a year-to-year basis there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, that's always kind of perplexed me. I mean, moving from a cost per gallon to increasing it every year or with inflation, I mean, there's a lot of fluctuations there. I don't think they consider, when gas was at all-time lows, or not all-time lows, but when gas was, way down from $3.50 a gallon, down to, $1.80, you would think that would save them money, right? Because that, consumption of gasoline is considered in construction projects and roads and things like that. Where did that money go? So, there are other factors here. Does that proposal, I mean, is that generally what people think needs to happen, is to move from a fuel from what we have now to fuel indexing, as they call it?
It wasn't discussed a lot, the last couple of days. But I know that last session, they tried to pass just a straight gas tax increase. And so I think there may be some consensus out there that, hey, we have to do something. And so this is kind of part of that proposal. But the first day that the task force met on Wednesday, they came in, they actually adopted this report that they have to have out by September 1st. And it was kind of strange because immediately after they adopted this report, they've been meeting over a year. This report's 20 pages long. The amount of time and hours and money they put into the task force, is really added up. They put a lot of work in. Immediately after they adopted their final report, the governor's office and DFNA actually presented a new income tax proposal. And I think it caught a few of the task force members off guard. But I think the consensus is, that they actually like this plan better. And just to kind of give a breakdown, they called it the 245.96.5 plan. And what it would do, Paul, instead of one, or it would move to one single tax bracket rather than the multiple tables and brackets. Now it would be one table with 4 brackets starting out and then moving down to 3. And so we would have a 2%, 4%, 5.9%, 6.5% tax rate. And then phase 2 of that would be 2%, 4%, 5.9%. So that we would get the top tax rate on individual income tax here in the state, eventually down to 5.9%. In addition, it would basically triple the standard deduction, which is somewhat similar to what they did at the federal level.
Yeah.
A lot of the tax relief and reform at the federal level was by increasing that standard deduction as much as they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you think that they like that as well. Now, they like that more. Now, so you say that they were caught off guard, or some were caught off guard by this. So that you think that the governor's plan, I mean, we would assume that the governor's plan is the one that they're going to go with, because that tends to be what always happens. You know what I'm saying? So that's interesting, like you said, that they've spent all this time in the task force meetings. Although I guess, trying to give the benefit of the doubt here, the governor's plan might be based loosely on some of the information that the task force ferreted out. I mean, is that possible?
Yes, and they were, I think, caught off guard a little bit because it was new. But when they got into it more on Tuesday, they started referring more of a modification of the Option A plan. I would say it's probably maybe simplification of that plan as well, to it really one table, and then by phase 2, just 3 rates. I mean, that's very, simple and clear. And so there were a couple legislators who are like, well, how does this affect the final report? And, why are you just not bringing this to us? And they said they'd been working on it a long time. They just didn't have it complete to where they could present it, to where they could also ensure there's, they said, no tax increases that people paid because of the rate changes. And so I think it was pretty well received. I know on yesterday, Thursday, the second day of the meeting, they did a breakdown of Coke Heating of the tax foundation, did a breakdown on the revenue impact of that. And Paul, she actually, the way she structured it, one of her final recommendations, instead of doing a 2-phase part of this, where they would first drop it down to 6.5% as the top rate, they would go all the way through with phase 2 to 5.9%. Now, she removed out the inventory tax credit reduction to get to that, but totally implementing all the proposals, increases, decreases, with the phase all the way through phase 2 of this plan, would see a net reduction of $203 million.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, if that, and I have said, look, there's a long way. It's a long way from recommending something to actually getting something in law. And I'm concerned that you might get the victory lap. We passed $203 million. The government's going to have to cut somewhere if that's the case, or they're going to have to come back with other bills that try to make up that revenue. And so we need to be on the lookout for that, especially. But I mean, if the recommendation is $203 million less revenue going to the government than going now, that is the definition of a tax cut. That's a big, that's a pretty big tax cut, meaning we're getting to keep more of our money. And so you got to think, if that's the case, that's a positive thing for the people of Arkansas.
Yeah, it really is. And what was really good about Nicole's presentation as well, it gave a net tax savings chart that showed, okay, if you make this much in taxable income, what are your savings? And so those making between $25,000 and $50,000 would have, at least just on individual income tax, would save $166. Those making above $81,000 would see tax savings of over $600. And so there would be, for those 21,000 and under, it would be net tax savings of zero. But they are, if we go back to the last session, we have to remember that there is a tax cut for those making under 21,000.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of already baked into the pie. It's not an additional, cut to those rates. So those were the kind of the net tax savings for individual thinking, okay, at the end of the day, how does this affect me? Well, anywhere from $160 to $616 is what someone can expect to save.
There are Democrats on this task force. Any gauge on how they feel about leaving $192 million back with the people instead of sending it to government like we are now?
There really wasn't much vocal, I guess, dissatisfaction or anything like that. Now, Senator Joyce Elliott did ask at the very end of the second day, how does this affect all the work we've done so far? And the basic response was, I think what everyone kind of knows is, at the end of the day, this is all great, but until we get a bill and we have an up or down vote, this is all kind of just talk and recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was more the response to her questions like, this document, we just adopted this final report, how is this going to affect our final report? And the response from Chairman Hendren was, this is a static this is not a static document. It's dynamic. It's going to be changing, but that they're going to try to incorporate this new proposal into that over the next few months, and they're going to begin drafting actual bills that would codify and implement some of the recommendations they put out.
I'm going to assume that a lot of this has already been decided. Would you think this? I mean, I know this is the public face. I just think, with the governor coming in with his plan kind of at the last minute, right as they need to be giving a recommendation according to what the law says by the 1st of September of this year. I got a feeling that they're already working on some pieces of legislation, and they kind of already know which way they want to go. Maybe this is a general direction of where they want to go, but I think they probably know specifically exactly what they want to do based on past experience. So
yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, I think everyone kind of came into this knowing what they wanted to do and what their goal was. One other thing, Paul, that they did mention yesterday, and it was kind of interesting because CFA, Conduit for Action, put out an article talking about, what we really need to look at too, though, is, these business-friendly indexes where we look at, Arkansas compared to all the other states. So where do we rank on individual income tax when it comes to, being friendly to businesses, drawing businesses to Arkansas? And Nicole actually did it. Part of her presentation was on that. And so her projection was if we fully implement all the final recommendations, that it would move Arkansas from 39th overall in state business tax climate to 36th overall. And when you break that down, every component actually stayed the same except for corporate income tax. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm curious. I know she's going to run the numbers for this new proposal, but based on the full recommendation in the report that they approved, this is the numbers. And so corporate income moved from 39th overall to 26th. That's, a subcomponent there. Sales tax stayed the same. Property tax stayed the same. Individual income stayed the same on where we rank compared to other states. And overall, we moved from 39th to 36th on the business tax climate index rating with the tax foundation.
So we moved up 3 slots. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. All of this for 3 slots. But still, I mean, I'm trying to have a silver lining mentality here. The glass is half full type mentality. Hey, Josh Waters, I appreciate it, sir. Thanks so much for coming on the program, waking up early with us.
Yep, absolutely, Paul. Have a great weekend.
Alrighty, you too. Folks, want to direct you to this fantastic article at conduitnews.com about how Kirby Ward was found not guilty for carrying a weapon out of Greenbrier. You need to go read it and watch that YouTube video of him being cited and having his gun confiscated. That's certainly garnering a lot of attention. We're going to be right back on this Johnny Cash Friday. Don't go anywhere.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate very much your generous invitation to be here tonight. You bear heavy responsibilities these days, and an article I read some time ago reminded me of how particularly heavily the burdens of present-day events bear upon your profession. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone broke, and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Ingalls ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeois cheating. But when all his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath to the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, revolution, and the Cold War. If only this capitalistic New York newspaper had treated him more kindly, if only Marx had remained a foreign correspondent, history might have been different. And I hope all publishers will bear this lesson in mind the next time they receive a poverty-stricken appeal from a small increase in the expense account from an obscure newspaper man. I have selected as the title of my remarks tonight, "The President and the Press." Some may suggest that this would be more naturally worded, "The President versus the Press," but those are not my sentiments tonight. It is true, however, that when a well-known diplomat from another country demanded recently that our State Department repudiate certain newspaper attacks on his colleagues, it was unnecessary for us to reply that this administration was not responsible for the press, for the press had already made it clear that it was not responsible for this administration. Nevertheless, my purpose here tonight is not to deliver the usual assault on the so-called one-party press. On the contrary, in recent months, I have rarely heard any complaints about political bias in the press, except from a few Republicans. Nor is it my purpose tonight to discuss or defend the televising of presidential press conferences. I think it is highly beneficial to have some 20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor, finally, are these remarks intended to examine the proper degree of privacy which the press should allow to any president and his family. If, in the last few months, your White House reporters and photographers have been attending church services with regularity,
all right, ladies and gentlemen, real quick.
That has surely done them no harm.
Headline, 4.5% voter turnout in Rogers passes a $300 million debt package. The city of Rogers held a special election last week where just 4.5% of registered voters showed up to pass $300 million in bonds for streets, parks, fire, and police services. The future tax increase package was split into 5 parts, with the second part extending a 1% sales tax increase to help finance the plan. Special elections have increased dramatically over the past 12 months after attempts to reform them failed by a single vote in the 2017 legislative session. This story up right now at conduitnews.com.
On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever be a Secret Service man. My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security, a challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society 2 requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. 2 requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for being with us. Conduit News Radio here this morning on this Johnny Cash Friday. The phone number 870-275-9799, and we have with us in studio, we have State Representative Dan Sullivan is here. Dan, welcome back to the program,
Good
sir.
morning, Paul. Glad to be back. I think this is the first time I've been back since I won my primary election.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, and I think that was a certainly positive thing. And I mean, what is your feeling on how that primary went that you were victorious in?
I think they made the right decision. And I really appreciate the support from your listeners, from people like the Patriots, from my motorcycle friends, and everybody that got to the polls and voted.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that, and look forward to serving another term.
Speaking of terms, let's talk about terms. Let's talk about, what do you think? What do you think about Issue 3, which would cap term limits at 10 years?
Well, I'm still haven't made my mind up, because I do agree that there should be some sort of cap on the number of years that a representative or senator can run. I think that's a good idea. I think the concept is good. But right now, I'm against, and I think the 10-year cap in there is a bad idea. What that would do, if you have and there are many House members who serve in the House and then move to the Senate. And I think one of the best reasons to have those people doing that is institutional knowledge is critical. You wouldn't find a business that would promote somebody to leadership in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years. It takes that long to learn how things work. Nor would you kick your leadership out of business every 10 years and turn that over. So in principle, I know this is different because it's legislature and you do want protections there. So I think the caps are good. But again, the 10 years is too short. You take a House member that serves for 6 years, does a good job, the people like them. If they decide to run in the Senate, which many do, then they would be limited to just 1 term in the Senate. And if you ran in an election, that would be used against you. Why would you want to elect someone just for 1 4-year term? And that's a valid point. So I think, the old term limits, I think, was pretty good. 3 years in the House and 2 terms, or 3 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate, which went to 14 years.
So you're talking about pre-John Woods?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was a pretty good limit and addressed many of the points that are being made. But again, I think the 10 years is just a poor selection. You have to also consider that every 10 years we redraw our districts and set new boundaries out there.
The census, yeah.
We do the census, right?
Yeah.
And and in fact, what the Senate does, when you enter the Senate during that census year, you draw for a 2-year term or a 4-year term.
Yeah.
So you're going to get people who are in the House 6 years, they run and win in the Senate, and then they draw a 2-year term.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about it. So what State Representative Dan Sullivan just said here is in this scenario, you could have a state House member who serves 6 years in the House and would have 1 4-year term theoretically in the Senate if they ran and won. But on a census year, they might draw a 2-year term and be capped at 8 years instead of
Correct.
10. That is interesting.
And I
didn't know
want to
that.
be sure and verify that, but the people I've talked to, and when I look into it and the way I read it, that's the way I've read it. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll be willing to stand corrected on that.
Yeah, definitely want to. That's interesting.
I think that's a real detriment. You know, and of course, you can have the broader conversation about people ought to be able to have serve who they want to serve, and you know, all of that conversation. But again, I think the 10-year cap is just ill-conceived. And if we wanted to go back to 6 years and 8 years, you know, 3 terms and 2 terms, I would support that.
So do you think, let me ask you this, we're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. Let me summarize your position. You're for term limits. You're just not for 10-year term limits. You think maybe where it is now, 16 is a good thing.
Well, 16 or 14.
Okay, it was. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because the
before John Woods, and then that's the reason we're here, I guess. I mean, the reason why there's such a strict, why it's basically the pendulum has swung even further than it was with this proposal is because, and I've said this on the radio, you know, that the government kind of deceived the people, and so the people are now saying, you know, we're gonna attempt to put an even stricter check on you guys.
Well, and I would. Since you have the sign up right behind you that says "attack problems, not people," I won't say that.
He's a convicted.
Well, I'm not going to attack you in your comment.
Oh, I see. No, I'll attack John Woods though because he's a convicted felon and he's the reason we're in this situation.
I got you, but I don't believe it was government that did that. You know, the people voted for that, and people, if they were fooled, they have to own that. You can't. I think it's not. As a legislator, I can't say, "Well, golly gee, I was fooled." You know, I have to own if I made a poor decision and I voted for something, and I have, that I didn't know enough about, that I have to own that they didn't trick me. I was the one that made that error. I own that, and I apologize for that. So whether it was a senator that did that or others that did it, the people voted for it. I think it was an error to vote for this current system. And, you know, people are saying that under this current system, a senator or a House member could serve not 20 years, but 22 years based upon that same census rule.
Yeah, it can affect you in a positive light in terms of, or maybe a negative light.
And I think we've just overreacted. You know, it takes a long time for a House member or a senator to get to know the district and people outside the district. You know, it's taken me a few years to get to know people, all the people in the Patriot group.
Yeah.
You know, of other groups that are out there. It's taken me a while to get to know people who listen to Conduit all over the state. And it takes a while to get to know people who are in Republican committees, in Tea parties, to interact with those people. And I think it takes those people a long time to trust me. You know, they have to see my votes not just in one session, but in a couple of sessions. You know, I don't think I would have won my last election had the people not known me. Even the people that disagreed with me knew me. You know, I had a constituent in one of my communities that said, "Dan, your voting record hurts me personally in my business, but you have stood strong for my community, and I'm probably going to end up voting for you because I know how much you care about the people that live in my community."
Wow.
You know, that it was really impactful to me. And it's true, I do really care about the people in my district and what happens to them, even if I disagree with them. But to build up that kind of trust takes time. And to limit that time to 8 years or limit that time, because essentially this bill is going to say you're not going to have many people that go from the House into the Senate. It just competitively, I did my 6 years and now I'm going to run for one House term and I've got to raise 100.
One Senate term.
One Senate term, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have to raise $150,000 and run for one term. If I'm donating to someone Why would I donate to someone who's limited to one term? Why wouldn't I find a candidate who I can keep in there for 2 terms, good or bad?
Yeah.
I think it's going to put a real burden on
These
finding
are interesting
people to make
arguments.
that move.
Interesting arguments. We're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. Some of these arguments I haven't heard yet from the people who are not supportive of this issue 3, to take the term limits from 16 down to 10 years. It certainly is very interesting. I will say this, though, okay, because I tend to support the 10-year, the term limit thing. A lot of the people out there who are not for this, I have seen on social media, they are really, really vocal about how this will empower bureaucrats and agency heads. And I've seen a lot of these people are politicians who are saying, listen, if we want to fight the agency heads, they, wield all of this power. We've got to have longer terms so we can deal with them. Whether this passes or whether it fails by the vote of the people, I would just encourage all politicians who right now are critical of agency heads outside the session to have that same criticism inside the session and have that same mistrust inside the session, because I've heard from some who I would think maybe, I don't know, I think that would just be healthy to, okay, win, lose, or draw. Like, we've got to really get these bureaucracies under control.
Paul, I heard a really powerful person in the state who I asked why they didn't run for political office tell me, I would rather be a kingmaker than a king. And it's more important to powerful people to be the person behind the power than it is to be the person in so-called power. You talk a lot about legal graft. And if our battle is against legal graft, then we need to be really concerned about the kingmakers, not as well as the people who are the kings in the powerful positions. And I think if you want to be in legislative position, you want to be in the legislature, the easiest way, and people told me this when I got there, they said the easiest way to get into power and to stay in power is go along to get along. That's the easiest way to do it. And those people are very easy to recruit, and they're very easy to find. They just want to be in power. It's hard to find people who will stand up against the power. That's very difficult to do. It's far and few between. And when we find them, we need to support them. And I know Conduit and you support that also, but I just think those folks are hard to find, and I think the powerful are going to find it easy to recruit new legislators and to keep them in office.
We're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. I really appreciate your thoughts on this. Although I may disagree, you can definitely make reasoned arguments on both sides of this issue. Can we talk just a little bit about issue 1? Can we shift gears here?
Sure.
We just have a little bit of time left. So, we're talking about issue 3 just now, the term limits. Issue 1 is the, quote, tort reform. It's kind of a divisive issue. You got some people that are saying...
Kind of.
So what are your thoughts on issue 1?
Well, I've come out strongly supporting issue 1.
Supporting issue 1?
I'm sorry. Opposing issue 1.
I was going to say, I thought...
Golly.
Well, it's confusing.
Well, it shouldn't be for me. Again, and if I'm confused, I own that. But I've come out opposed to issue 1. That was, again, one of the reasons I had an opponent. I had some of the big groups out there, the hospitals, nursing homes, and those kingmakers. The people who are the kingmakers are the ones who are supporting issue 1. Those of us who are on the other side of that, I think, are kind of the resistance movement. Mm-hmm. And I hope we can gain some strength in there. Again, I think similarly to issue 3, this is just a bad bill. Could we make some tort reform? Yes. Again, this tort reform combines, 3 or 4 different issues, and some of those I vehemently disagree with. Mm-hmm. Some of them I just think need some reworking. But you can't put all those issues together and have something that's good for the people. So, again, just to shorten that up, I think the people that are supporting this are kind of the powerful and the kingmakers behind the others. Yeah. And I think it's just a bad bill at this time.
Yeah. Well, State Representative Dan Sullivan, I appreciate you coming
Glad
on the
to be
program.
here. Thank you,
it's
Paul.
always great to have a civil, congenial conversation about the issues of the day.
Amen. And listen, I appreciate your listeners and appreciate their support. Thank you very much.
All righty, folks, it's Johnny Cash Friday. Back in just a moment.
On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever being a Secret Service man. My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security, a challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy.
Where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government. And the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need.
The week the Washington officially lost its collective mind. We read you a little bit of this at the beginning of the show. What's interesting about the case against Mr. Manafort is that prosecutors had declined to pursue some of the charges way back when. But that was before Mr. Manafort betrayed the political establishment by working for Mr. Trump's successful presidential campaign. Once he committed that cardinal sin, all bets were off. That's why so many people see this whole crusade as a dangerous and dishonest political prosecution. It's not Paul Manafort that people care about. It's the idea that Mr. Manafort got shoved through a political criminal meat grinder all because he worked for Donald Trump. Where was this prosecutorial zeal when it came to Hillary Clinton and her illegal bathroom email server, or all the obvious global pay-to-play shakedowns by the Clinton Foundation? If people in Washington honestly want to understand the hostility and distrust American voters have for their federal government, they must admit that this stinks to the high heavens. Then there's former Trump lawyer fixer Michael Cohen, who has turned on the president like a scalded dog. In case anyone wonders if Mr. Trump has lost his wickedly funny sense of humor, hold your nose and take a peek at Twitter. He writes, "If anyone's looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen." That might be the most trolling tweet of the year for him. Seriously, after the guy pleads guilty, it doesn't avoid jail time, by the way. He's still gonna go to jail. Trump tweets out, "If anyone's looking for a good lawyer, it's not this guy. He's going to jail." I would encourage you to read this. Charles Hurt, The Nuclear Option, Hot Swampy Heat, the week Washington officially lost its collective mind. It's a riot. It's a hoot. Also, as we wind things down here, I want to remind you guys, if you'll go over to conduitnews.com and go ahead and subscribe for our email newsletter in case you missed it. Right now, there's a ton of great stuff up there at conduitnews.com. There's the breakdown of the Kirby Ward not guilty plea. I would encourage you to look at that. But we've also got some links from some of our best videos of the week. Yesterday, John D. Coons, the Chinese expert on the threat that China poses to the United States. I have a video of, this headline just says, "Paul Harrell defends family counsel." Also, hear Maria Espinoza talk about what she believes needs to happen as a result of the illegal alien that got charged with the murder of Molly Tibbetts. She said we need to put troops on the border, that it's past time to do that. There's all that and more up at conduitnews.com, as well as this broadcast and others like it for free. So head on over there, sign up for our newsletter when you're there as well. and Arkansas. I hope you have a great and prosperous, relaxing weekend. Be safe.